Hi, Dennis here. Let's talk about English words. The first English word we're going to talk about is dictator. Dictator. Now, when I say the word dictator, what do you think of? I think we all picture them in our minds, the same old 20th century dictators. But is dictator always a bad thing? I don't know. Let's use history for an example. The word dictator comes to us from Rome. In Latin, it is one who dictates, and it was actually an office you could be elected to. An office to which you can be elected was dictator. The Roman Senate, in times of great emergency, great stress, would nominate and elect a dictator. The dictator had unlimited power. He could do whatever he wanted to do, but only for 6 months. After that, he had to give up his power, and the Senate would take over again, and the Senate was prohibited, forbidden by tradition and religion to prosecute the dictator for anything he'd done before. Very important. One of the greatest examples Rome has for us is a man named Cincinnatus. When Rome was very young, when Rome was just a city, not a wide-ranging empire, enemies around Rome had cornered and was about to massacre the Roman army, led by one of her 2 consuls, consul being the leader of the Roman Republic. The Senate called on a former consul, Cincinnatus, please help us, please go save the army, which he did. And after he raised another army, saved the other army, came back, instead of continuing on as dictator for the next 5 months, or even to try to take over and not give up power, after 2 weeks of dictatorship, he gave back the power to the Senate and went back to his farm. He is held up as an example of civic virtue, someone who cares more about his country than he cares about himself. Have there been other good dictators? Hard to say. What's a good dictator? We have the next Roman that is famous for being dictator was Sulla, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. It was against Roman tradition and against Roman law and against Roman religion for a general to march his troops into Rome, across the city limits. A Roman general couldn't even wear his military stuff within city limits. He had to formally lay down his generalship to go back into Rome. Don't go to Rome with your army. Sulla did. Sulla went into Rome, took over, and thanks to the loyalty of his army, declared himself dictator. And he put up signs of people's names, of those he felt were bad for Rome, Rome's enemies, his enemies, and whoever's name was on the list was outlaw and could be killed. Not only that, but whoever killed him gets his stuff, house, estates, slaves, everything. This only lasted for just over a year. After he got Rome back the way he thought it should be, he gave up power. You might think, well, that's just like Cincinnatus. Well, no. Cincinnatus was called by the Senate, and Sulla took power by force. This so weakened the Roman Republic, which was several hundred years old already, but so weakened the Republic that it couldn't take many more hits to the Constitution. A young man, a 16-year-old boy, really, named Julius Caesar, when Sulla took over, remembered this example, and when Caesar became consul, proconsul, and general of several legions, his enemies in the Senate told him, no, come back home without your armies, give up. We didn't tell you to go fight for 5 or 6 or 10 years. His supporters in the Senate said, Julius Caesar, if you come back, bring your armies, because your enemies in the Senate plan to prosecute you and convict you of stuff. So, Caesar took Sulla's example, marched on Rome, and took over. But the difference is that Caesar was popular, whereas Sulla was hated. And the same month that he was declared dictator for life, the Roman Senate assassinated and killed Caesar. So dictator, good, bad, depends. Another word, president, usually indicates, to most people, an elected position, something not like a dictator. Presidents, usually elected, can be good or can be bad, but they usually share power with somebody else in government. In the United States case, a Congress and a Supreme Court, totally independent things. If a president is more powerful than the legislature, he's a dictator. If the legislature can't stop any edicts, dictates by the president, he's a dictator. So, after 2 4-year terms, George Washington gave up power. He was called after that the modern Cincinnatus. The person who gave him that name was none other than Emperor Napoleon, Emperor of France, who had at one time been consul of France. Decided to become, he didn't call himself dictator, emperor was better. So he became emperor. Presidents can use the word president for legal sounding reasons and still be dictators. We have presidents in the world who are dictators. If your son is the next president, you're a dictator. If your wife is the next president, anyway, presidents should stay away from dynasties. There shouldn't be a family of presidents. This is wrong. This is just wrong. The Kennedys almost did it. The Bushes did it. I'm afraid the Clintons will do it too. So, to recap, presidents should not have dynasties. Speaking to you, America, choose your next president carefully. Oh, and Congress, get off your ass and do stuff. The only way a man can become dictator is if the legislator allows it. And you're allowing it by not doing anything. Do your job. Anyway, that was my opinion. That was an editorial opinion right there. So, thanks for listening. Adios, muchachos.